I'm Rosalyn Bronstein for the Palm Springs Public Library's local history project. Today is February 11th, 1987, and I'm here with Paul Summers. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Roz.
Fun for one teacher to be talking to another one this morning.
You never know what's going to happen when a couple of old pedagogues get together.
Exactly. We're going to do something wonderful.
We'll give it a tussle, babe.
That's right. I'm really interested in what brought you to Palm Springs.
Sort of a long, involved story and a chapter out of my life, I guess. I had, fresh out of college, I had landed a job in the height of the Depression with the Metropolitan Water District as a chemist and physicist. And we were doing the testing of all of the materials that went into the construction of the Metropolitan Water District, that canal and siphon system and tunnels that carry water from Colorado River at Parker Dam to the people of Los Angeles and 13 other then subscribing cities. And our job was to sort of oversee the construction, the materials that went into it, and Banning was the engineering headquarters for the operation. And as a part of this, I had an opportunity to conduct school kids from Banning High School through the laboratories, because it was one of the only scientific concerns that they had an opportunity to take field trips to. And after 18 months, need for my services in the testing laboratory folded up, and we were sitting around the lab one day at lunch talking, and the clerk asked, "What are you all going to do when the job winds up?" And I said, "Well, I left USC with a master's degree and a teaching credential. I think I'll try to get a job teaching." And he said, "Well, this is fine. My wife is the art teacher at Banning High School, and they're opening a new high school in Palm Springs next year. And if you like, I'll put in a word for you." Well, to make a long story shorter, he did, and I had a session with the superintendent of schools, and he was happy to hire me with the training that I had from college and in the real world of chemistry and physics. And he gave me a choice of either taking over the science department at Banning High School or becoming a part of the science department, or starting the science department at the new Palm Springs High School. I thought, well, I've never taught, and this is a new high school, so there isn't going to be anyone around to give me any problems, so why don't I take the one at Palm Springs? And this brought me to Palm Springs in 1938.
Was Palm Springs still a part of the Banning school system then?
Yes, Palm Springs at that time was a member of the Banning Union High School District. But prior to that, there had been a high school for about 2 years in 1922 at approximately the approximate site of Amado and Indian Avenue. But there were only 5 or 7 youngsters in this one-room school, and it couldn't justify its existence. So at that time, they started hauling the youngsters to Banning, where all children of high school age that lived in Palm Springs area made the daily trip by bus to Banning for the beginning of the school day and back to Palm Springs at the end of the day.
I'm rather interested in what Banning was like at that time that you were there.
Well, Banning was quite a thriving metropolis, made so by the funneling in of money that the Metropolitan Water District project and all its employees brought. And it was a pretty nice and respectable community. There was a lot more agriculture then, almonds and cherries and that sort of thing, which have now been dug out, of course, and become real estate developments and housing projects.
Had the Depression hit that area very much then?
Well, the Depression had hit all of the United States, probably less in California than anywhere else, but it had hit with considerable impact, and employment didn't come very easy.
So down to Palm Springs you came.
Yes, thankfully.
And you were married?
Yes, I was married, and I had a son about 18 months old.
And that was 1938?
1938 of September.
And was the school actually, was it ready for that fall?
No, as a matter of fact, it wasn't. The first day that school opened, in room 12, which was the largest room of the then 12-room campus, had no furniture. The only thing that was in there was the teachers' desks in most of the rooms, and the kids, all 88 of them, on opening day of September the 12th, 1938, registered from folding chairs in the largest room of the school, which was room 12 at the time.
And I understand that you were the science department. Is that?
I guess for want of something better, I'll accept blame for that. Yes, the high school opened, and there were only 8 teachers and a teaching principal, and they tried their best to offer as enriched a program as possible, and virtually every one of the teachers had a full 7-period schedule of a different subject every hour, and my assignment was biology, general science for the freshmen and biology for the sophomores, physiology for some who had biology that didn't want to go to chemistry or physics, then chemistry and physics and photography, and I also got roped into journalism, middle of this thing.
And you did that for quite a long time, didn't you?
Well, that went on for about 8 or 10 years, and then gradually other teachers came in, and I was able to shed some of the things like photography and biology, and finally settled down into chemistry and physics, and by that time I was moving into administration.
In thinking back about those 88 youngsters who enrolled that first day, what do you remember about them? Was it a kind of academic bunch, or?
Well, I have several impressions that kaleidoscopically impinge on my memory center at the moment. They all sort of descended on Palm Springs High School in shorts and sandals, and sort of unusual from a person trained at USC Los Angeles to see high school students attending classes in shorts and sandals. I wasn't too impressed with their academic habits at the time, because they had sort of deteriorated through the 2-hour bus trip in the morning going to school in Banning, and in the afternoon returning to Palm Springs. But there were a fantastic bunch of kids, and some of the greatest friendships that I have to this day were made from the kids at the early classes of Palm Springs High School. So they sort of shaped up, and things came on, and gradually the school's enrollment increased to 300 or 400, and it became really a wonderful, remarkable school where the faculty knew all of the kids, and the kids knew the faculty, and we all had great rapport, and it was really an ideal situation for a small town high school. And we attempted we had 2-track system, college preparatory and terminal education, hopefully for the commercial and the merchants and that sort of thing, the tradespeople.
What proportion would you say were college prep kinds of students?
Actually, it ran pretty high here. I would say it was probably 50-50. And probably it's the same to this day. It's probably that.
And so that even during the Depression, because that was the end of towards the end of the Depression, but I think that's quite remarkable, 50%.
I was quite impressed with it, and to a degree, most of these youngsters were sons and daughters of local merchants and tradesmen who followed the building trades, or who were in businesses here, or who were affiliated with the hotel operation or the tourist business in some degree. And life coming out of the Depression was sort of real and grisly, and the kids in those days realized that if they wanted anything to happen to them, they were going to have to go out and earn it themselves. The giveaway programs of governments and welfare hadn't come into existence at that time, so everyone had a seriousness of intent and purpose, and they jumped in to try to do the best they could with what assets they could bring to the commercial world that abounds.
When you came that first year, what was your salary? What were you paid as a teacher?
Well, that's sort of embarrassing thing. I received $1,800 a year as a starting salary in 1938, and I was happy to get it. And to show their appreciation for my involvement with the students and the program, Raymond Cree, the president then of the Board of Education, came over one day and said, "Paul, I want you to know how happy we are with what you've done. The board has unanimously agreed to give you a $50 raise for next year," which seemed like a great amount of money, but we were probably one of the highest paying schools in the area. Beaumont paid the minimum salary of $1,400 a year. They simply did not have the funds with which to offer really academic classes or to reward teachers in any way, shape, or means. So in terms of salary, that looked pretty good at that time, in spite of the fact that half of it went for housing. I was lucky to have an accommodation for $900 for the season.
Hadn't you said something about that was arranged by a school board member?
It was, bless his heart, Jack Williams, who was also a member of the school board, had a court up approximately where, on Indian Avenue, just between Amado and Alejo. And this court housed 3 or 4 teachers in little bungalows within the court. A very fortunate circumstance for them, because they couldn't have afforded the usual housing that comes with the salary that is available to teachers at that time.
And so you moved in September then. How did you adjust to the heat then, coming into the desert? And
frankly, we became so busy with the problems of opening a school and getting it furnished and establishing the courses and becoming oriented to the pupils and setting up the program that we were just too busy to notice the heat. Things just evolved, and we didn't pay much attention to it, and first thing you know, it was October. Then it was November. Heat was not a problem at all.
Did you stay here during the summers too?
No. The school always attempted to open on the first Monday following Labor Day, and it always attempted to close on the Friday preceding Decoration Day, May the 30th, and I had a standing assignment for a job in the Los Angeles area with the Los Angeles Times newspaper as an electrician, which trade I had followed as an electrical helper during high school summertime vacations and while I was attending college. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to implement the teaching salary with summertime employment, which on a monthly basis was considerably higher than my teacher's salary. So I managed to get by pretty well, and I enjoyed the summers in the Los Angeles and Pasadena area, and the winters in Palm Springs, the best of both lives, I guess we can say.
I know that you were involved with the yearbook too for a long time. How did that happen? Teaching all these science classes and then the yearbook.
That happened quite by accident. One of the teachers hired that first year, by the name of a Miss Dodd, had gone to Beverly Hills High School, and she, while a student there, had been the editor, I guess, of Beverly Hills High School's yearbook, and she volunteered to take on the yearbook here. But in the middle of the first semester, she had an opportunity to get a job to go back to her alma mater and become the foreign language teacher at Beverly Hills High School. So she left, and I was drafted into service of taking over this, because they said, well, you have science and chemicals, you can put together a photographic darkroom there, and you know most of the kids, so why don't you assume the yearbook? And for the next 15 years I supervised the yearbook, and did most of the photography and the processing of the pictures and that sort of thing.
One of the things that I've heard too is that the high school really wasn't quite ready, and that the teachers had to all pitch in those during the first months to.
Well, I don't know how much they did pitch in to this kind of thing, but I do recall there wasn't any tennis courts or much of anything in the way of shop buildings or that sort of thing, and I do remember shoveling one weekend, shoveling sand and gravel and feeding a cement mixer to work with some members, I think, of the Lions Club, who came out and with a concrete mixer and that sort of thing, and volunteer labor did proceed to stake out and pour the first 2 tennis courts that the school occupied. There were continuation of several projects of that magnitude, but that's the only one that I can remember that I was associated with.
Well, we had talked a little bit too about that there were seven buildings or 7 classrooms originally were there.
No, there were 12.
12.
There were 2 banks of 6 classrooms each. One of those rooms on the front Ramon Road thing, of course, was an administrative office and administrative center and principal's office and attendance area with a nurse's station and so forth, and then 5 classrooms that were involved in English, social studies, foreign language, that sort of thing. And then the bank north of that was another 6 classrooms that included a general large room which was a sort of a meeting facility for the entire student body, and another one of those rooms was relegated into food service, and it stored foods from suppliers, and the cooks met there and prepared the meals and offered school lunches, and it served as a cafeteria. On the run, you sort of marched through lines and went back somewhere, found a bench, made the rattlesnakes, greased with it, ate your lunch.
Were there really snakes about?
Oh yes, it wasn't unusual at all for someone to flush out a sidewinder or a rattlesnake in the grounds by the girls' dressing room. We don't say gymnasium; it was a girls' and boys' dressing rooms, and the shop building, which were 3 buildings outside the main quadrangle that were simply clapboard and batten with corrugated metal roof housing, which served the capacities that were indicated.
Now, what did I hear about the dressing rooms having certain knotholes in them?
Well, you know, boys will be boys. I'm told that there were occasional knotholes that dried up with weathering, and the knots fell out, provided peaking facilities for some of those inclined, which were most of them.
And what about the wood shop? That was that a part? Did that come soon after the first 12 rooms had
No,
been
those 3 outbuildings that made up the girls' gym, or the girls' dressing room and the boys' dressing room and the wood shop were there and in place, and the shop was pretty well equipped with workbenches and a power saw and a jointer, and the rest were hand tools and workbenches and a stash of lumber as far as the wood shop was concerned, and that sort of doubled in metalworking and whatever interest the youngsters had they wanted to pursue in the way of a shop type of activity.
I think the high school must have had an impact on Palm Springs, having the school here for the first time.
I think that it probably did, because the staff and the students were pretty much welcomed with open arms to the people that had facilities. Nellie Kaufman was very generous in making available the facilities of the Desert Inn for swimming or junior-senior proms or senior outings, as were the Wertheimers at the Colonial House in those days, as was Worth Pennies at El Mirador Hotel, and then Charlie Farrell at the Racket Club. So seemingly the high school did prove to be quite an asset to the business community in terms of their reception of it. They never seemed to tire of playing host to whatever functions the high school wanted to put on.
The feeder schools to the high school then were what schools did?
Guys, there was only one elementary school at the time it opened. That was Kathryn Flynn School, which is now the senior center. In about 2 years, the Nellie Kaufman Junior High School was built, and then there followed, probably close by, the Kathryn Flynn School, and then the Cielo Vista School, and Desert Hot Springs and Cathedral City, and then later, I don't know what, Cahuilla or Cielo Vista and Agua Caliente came into being. So there were no feeder schools other than Francis Stevens at the time.
When did it become a unified school district then?
There was a division that occurred, a separation from Banning before unification. After the second year of the existence of Palm Springs as a part of the Banning Union High School District, groundwork was laid for Palm Springs to disaffiliate with Banning Union High School District, and so they separated from it with State Department of Education approval and became a Palm Springs Union High School then. And the Palm Springs Union High School and the elementary school functioned as separate districts within the same town and the same communities. And in about 1947, a principal of the high school by the name of Ernest Ortel got together the administrative groundwork to bring about the unification of the elementary school and the high school and the junior high school into one common Palm Springs Unified School District. So that came about, I believe, in 1947.
Was Kathryn Finchie, when you came in 38, was she working as a principal then?
Kathryn Finchie was the principal of Francis Stevens Elementary School, and she probably taught a few classes or substituted when teachers were out ill, and just a fantastic gal was Kathryn. We had many close get-togethers and coordinating elements of the high school with the junior high school or the grammar school programs, and I found her thoroughly delightful and amenable and a dedicated educator for many, many years of association.
Paul, could we share a little bit of that yearbook? There's a picture that you wanted to share too of the high school, those early years.
This book has been through the wars. It used to have a nice leather binding all the way on the back, but the termites and dry rot have gotten to it and it collapsed, and we had to put it together for this occasion with some shoestring material. I don't know how much the camera will pick up of this picture. I'm sort of working backwards. This is the high school plant down here in the foreground. I'm going to have to get reoriented a little bit. Can you hold it? Oh, yes. This track around here was the field club, which was the predecessor of Angel Stadium. You can see there was no junior high school in existence there at the time. This is a school bus that I have a sad story I could share if there is time about, parked in the front of it, but it doesn't show too much. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that Clarence Macy was the pilot who carried Frank Dapron on a photographic tour over the high school to take this picture. I may be wrong, but I feel that that is correct. Are there any other things that you are
Tell
aware
us a little bit about that school bus. I think that would be interesting.
One of the first 2 years of existence of the high school football team was invited for a Saturday evening game with Imperial High School down out of Brawley. And so, to keep our appointment with destiny on this day, we started out about 20 football players and 2 coaches and the bus driver, 2 Imperial. The thing started consuming oil by the tons, and we stopped at every service station along the way and bought all we could get to try to keep the noise quiet and that sort of thing. Finally, the thing just about conked out at the time we arrived in Brawley, and we got there. The bus driver made contact with somebody in Palm Springs who got a hold of the bus company in Los Angeles, who got connecting rod bearings and so forth, and sent down by Greyhound while we were playing the football game during the night at Imperial High School. And the mechanics that worked in the Brawley High School or the Imperial High School shop all night, taking the pen down and replacing the connecting rod and resealing the thing back. But unfortunately, on the return trip, that didn't hold up, because it turned out that the crankshaft had an egg shape on the throw of that particular connecting rod cylinder, and it was about to go out again, so we had to stop in Brawley to pull the pan again and have we removed the cylinder and connecting rod and everything out of it and tried to fly home on 5 cylinders. And finally the bus conked out just the other side of the Salton Sea, and we were sitting there in about 12 o'clock on Sunday following the game, about to dispatch someone to go to a telephone to send a Greyhound bus to pick up the team, when a very big-hearted truck driver pulled a big Macmillan gasoline tank truck and trailer up in front of us and came to halt and come back and said, are you having trouble, man? We said we are, and he backed this rig up to us, and they threw out a chain and put that chain on the school bus, and here we came flying 60 miles to Palm Springs behind an 8,000-gallon tank truck and trailer and the school bus. He pulled us right up Ramon Road and parked us right in front of Palm Springs High School on Sunday afternoon. If the Highway Patrol had seen us, or if they even existed, they'd have had us all in jail for the hazardry involved. But at that time, it was a means to an end, which was to get the kids home.
Well, and so you were coach then, too.
Well, I assisted. I was the line coach for the football team, and strangely, they're still in town today, 4 youngsters on the football team that made that trip. I say youngsters, they're a little bit up along today. Walter Coldlaser was on the football team. Harold Touchbarber, he and Waller were tackles. Alvino Siva was a member of the football team. And let's see, there was one, retired Lieutenant Commander Bob Moore. He was a member of the football team. They're all still in the community, which is sort of an interesting sidelight.
Are there some other things in this yearbook too? How did the name Chia come to be?
Chia is a desert plant that has some pods up at the top of these sprouts that come up, and these pods contain seeds, and Indian legend had it that and they used these seeds, they ground them up to make flour for which they made bread, and legend had it that if you eat the seeds of the chia you would become wise. And so somehow or other wisdom and education and the need for a name for a yearbook all got together in some creativist mind, and a book was born.
This is such a special book. Is there were some other pictures too, I thought, that were very interesting.
Well, this was the way that the kids came to school when I said shorts and sandal clad. This was there's one of these girls, Iris Riley Lane, is still in town, and she and her husband had the Lars Lane Art Gallery for a number of years and just closed it this year.
And each of these photographs is pasted in, isn't it?
Yes, actually, the way this thing came together, they didn't have money, but the kids wanted a yearbook, and they said, well, we'll have the photography class take and do the pictures, and we'll buy these covers, which I think the covers, together with the fillering pages, cost $1.75, and I don't know, probably $100 or so were expended for photographic materials, and every picture in here is hand-mounted. These are the members of the senior classes, and there were 39 graduates that first year, and each of those 39 youngsters we made I think 102 copies of this book, and so we had to process 102 pictures individually of this kid, 102 of this kid. Every picture that's in here was individually handmade and hand processed in the photographic darkroom that I got saddled with for 15 years, which was sort of a Herculean task. But, I did have pictures here of the faculty, and incidentally, the center on that football team went on to become the president of the student body at Whittier College, and Don Pendry, another person who played on the football team, went to the University of Stanford, was taken out of there as a sophomore and drafted into the Naval V-12 program and sent to Caltech for training in electronic engineering, and he graduated the second highest in his class of a highly selected group at Caltech, and on the basis of that they sent him to Massachusetts Institute of Technology for advanced training in electrical engineering, where he graduated the tops in his class. And after that they sent him on a shakedown cruise to commission him, and by that time the war was all over. He went back to Stanford University to get administrative training, and he wound up as the head of the European division of International Business Machines, and after that he went with Xerox or Polaroid, I've forgotten which. So memories that linger very deeply from the kids that I was associated with in the first year. These two pictures here represent the faculty. There were the 8 teachers that made a part of the original high school. Absent from there is the teaching principal, Morris Richardson, who is shown on another page. It's a gruesome looking bunch, isn't it?
No, they're not gruesome.
Well, it was quite a yearbook. It went on for about 30-some pages. This is Don Pendry, who was, and this kid here, discharged from the Navy, he became affiliated with he was a pharmacist mate in the service, and he performed the same function with a leprosarium in Carville, is it Louisiana, where for about 15 years, when he finally retired from that, and he's living now up in Arrowhead or someplace close by. This is Barbara McKinney Moore, who you probably remember.
Yes.
There are quite a number of people that stayed with the community. This youngster here heads a legal firm of about 23 attorneys in Phoenix, Arizona, and both he and his wife is a counselor in the school system down in Arizona. This is Carmela Matasio, Iris Riley's sister. Oh, just all sorts of groups of. And as you see, every time I look at this, I think, my God, 101 pictures of this sloshing through the developer, the fixative, the hypocolor materials. This was the Letterman's Club and the band, and
Who was the band director? Was that one of the teachers who took that on?
No, he was hired as a music teacher, a man by the name of Walter Testa, who left, and the last time I saw him, I went in a drugstore in Hollywood one evening to buy a cigar, of all things, and who was behind, who else but Walter Testa was behind the counter, and this was 25 years later, I guess, and he said that he was just helping out his uncle who owned the drugstore, and he was doing double duty for him that evening. I don't know what he was doing.
When did you leave teaching to get into administration? How did that happen?
Well, that sort of came about in phases because I was sort of always being shoved from the classroom into administrative areas, and my first venture came as a combination vice principal and chemistry physics teacher at the high school, where in those days basically most of my function was in attendance matters. Shortly after 3 or 4 years of serving in that dual capacity and still retaining the assignment of assistant football coach, I had the opportunity to become assistant superintendent in charge of business services. Shortly, 3 or 4 years after unification occurred, I served in that capacity for 4 years, and at the end of that time I went back to the high school, into the classroom, and I again over a period of time I was urged back into administration, and I became the vice principal of the high school in 1969, at which capacity I served mostly in work with teachers, curriculum construction, and the scheduling of 1,700 students into their selected 6 of 220 course offerings to be assigned to their selection of 6 of 80 teachers available and placed into a 7-period day with 50 classroom stations. And along with that student scheduling, I also was involved with the processing of applications for community use of district facilities, and I think the last year that I was there we made available over the use of facilities that the school had, the citizens of Palm Springs, over 1,300 different things, which involved pools and tennis court scheduling and the auditorium use and softball and baseball diamonds and football field and gymnasium facilities, on and on and on. Also, part of the duties of the last year was sort of supervising the athletic program, which is a far greater thing than most people realize. That there are about 600 students that the athletic program served at that time, and that involved a total of 20-some different teams. Varsity, junior varsity, freshman and sophomore, boys and girls teams in football, baseball, basketball, tennis, track, badminton, swimming, softball, you name it. This in total involved some 300 odd different contests throughout the year, over half of which took place at home, and those home contests had to be provided with officials and all of the paraphernalia for the sport in readiness, and if it was an admission thing, manning the gates and taking money and depositing and tickets, and it was a sort of a never-ending thing, but it served a real need, and also the transportation involved. If you think of having to travel 150 of 327 contests at various places throughout all of Southern California, that gets to be quite a burdensome thing. And too many of these contests take place in daytime, and so there's arranging of substitute teachers to take the place of the coaches who are on the lam for the day. So that was my involvement with administration, and I enjoyed every minute of every association that I ever had with any of the kids in the extracurricular or social programs. I found them a delight to work with.
Tell me a little bit. You mentioned the auditorium and booking things in. When was the auditorium built?
That was built in 1957 and 1958 as a part of a bond project that involved the building of the science wing, the auditorium, and I think the parts of Kauai's Cielo Vista School and the Kauai multipurpose room as a giant building project incorporated in one bond election.
That was when you were business manager, wasn't
Yes.
it? And hadn't you been interested in the tax exempt Indian lands too, in terms of?
Yes. One of the things that I did that I was quite proud of was we had been attending meetings of administrators and coaches and that sort of thing, and it came to my attention that many of the school districts were being allocated funds from the federal government because of so-called federal impact. These principally were close by military encampments where the sons and daughters of military personnel attended the schools, and federal government had been reimbursing the school district for the operating cost of instruction only at that time. But I conceived the idea that not only was instruction involved, but they needed facilities to house these students. And Palm Springs at the time had 27,000 acres of land in various sections that were tax-exempt Indian lands. So I got a hold of the State Department of Education, a man by the name of John Briner, and said, I think I have a case to make if you will back me with the federal government for federal impact for housing. And he said, I think you have a point, why don't you file an application? So one night I grabbed a secretary and went down to the office and put in an application for assistance under federal impact to house, to get money to assist in the housing of the children of parents who either or both lived or worked in privately owned improvements overlying the tax-exempt Indian lands. And after several years of fumbling about, the federal government agreed that we had a case, and so we had to do all sorts of demographic and statistical studies and that sort of thing and allocate the funds to one particular school. But we did get $160,000 of funds to help with school housing, and that money all went into the building of Cielo Vista School. That was my role in that.
That is really, that's really creative, I think, in terms of financing. So that you stayed then as business manager
I was only there for 4 years, from 1953 through 1957, June of 57, and back to the classroom in September of 57.
Well, when I think of you, I think of your connection with students, because over the years I know you've stayed very closely in touch with so many. How many students did you figure that you
At the time I retired, I did make an exact count by going to the registrar and getting the graduation programs and actually counting the number on each of the 36 years through which I had served. And at that time there were just exactly 6,000 students. Now, since 1974, when I did retire, there have been, I don't know how many, 74, well, to 86, there's 12 years, and there have been about 400 in the graduating class of each of those 12 years. So you add 4,800 on to 6,000, you come up with very close to 12,000 graduates, of which I knew and worked rather intimately with the 6,000 that I did have contact with.
We talked a little bit too about the war years and the impact that that had on the high school.
It it did. It had tremendous impact on the high school because the war broke out in December 7th, 1941. And at that time, the enrollment at the high school hadn't gotten much over 200. And all of the teachers knew all of the students firsthand very well, and they all felt like family to the teachers. And so in some years later, and in 42 and 43 and 44, when the youngsters began to be drafted and taken into the service, and some of them didn't make it back, it was quite a blow. I distinctly remember the 7 youngsters whose lives were lost in World War II, because I had worked with every one of them as a football coach and as a supervisor of a yearbook, and many of them I'd had in my classes in science in high school. And the first to go, I think, was Herb Leno, who was lost in some action over the North Sea. No one ever quite knew his fate or destiny. Norval Kelly was another to go. Alan Hall, Steve Levi, Raul Prieto, the 7 of them. I still see sort of to this day, because to most of them and to me they were like sons, and it was quite a blow.
In looking back at those days, the late 30s and through the 40s, what were the greatest problems that you had to deal with in terms of the school as a teacher?
Actually, there were no problems, other than my own ignorance and trying desperately to bring about course offerings that would adapt the kids to whatever their needs in life may be, whether it was terminal education or to prepare for university. And we did have many youngsters who succeeded admirably at the top universities in the United States, from Yale, Harvard, Cornell, just scads of them, to Stanford, UCLA, California, USC, on and on. So those proved to be very rewarding memories, the contacts and the rapport that I established with the youngsters that somehow or other came face to face with me in one program or another.
Did you find parents were very cooperative?
Oh, extremely so. I never found, I don't believe in all my years of school work, any uncooperative parent. If they had obstreperous children or problem children, believe me, they were searching for answers, and any help that you could give was heartfeltly accepted with great thanks and emotion. And obviously, in dealing with the 6,000 youngsters that I did deal with, the statistical averages are such that there are problems. Most of the youngsters that came through the school system turned out to be wonderful homemakers and mothers, merchants or tradesmen, doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects. The greatest number of them turned out to be teachers. I think I could drum up very easily 100 names of people who were teachers. Of course, we did have some youngsters who turned out to be alcoholics and addicts, and a few hookers and various and miscellaneous felons, a few murderers and murderees. But that's the spectrum of life.
Mm-hmm. Was there a problem, today in the schools there are other problems of alcohol and drugs. Were you aware at that time too of some of those problems?
I can't say that I was. Those problems became highly magnified, if they existed at all, in the early and mid-60s, accompanying the Korean and the Vietnam Wars. And to my knowledge, there had never been much of any incidents of marijuana or cocaine or heroin. And we hear that it's quite rampant today, its use, not only among school children, but it permeates the fabric of society, from corporate chambers to the military, you name it, it's everywhere.
When the war ended, did the high school start expanding then? Was that a time of expansion?
It did, because during the war years, you couldn't get building materials because they were on a priority list that had to be okayed by the military people. And soon after the cessation of combat, building materials began to free up, and the board was very cooperative and attempted to keep ahead of the student needs with a building program. Added schools, added facilities, libraries, that sort of thing.
How did Palm Springs recruit staff? Where did most of the teachers come from?
To start with, at the high school, the first principal was a graduate and alumnus of Whittier College, and so virtually all of our staff came from Whittier College. I was practically the only black sheep, being a USC man. But after he and the unification, we had the first superintendent of the Unified School District was Arthur Hoff, and he used to go back to take trips through the Midwest and on recruiting tours to bring teachers here. And usually word of mouth, teachers would hear of, they had family members or friends, or they knew some classmate from an institution, and by referral and sort of that kind of networking, we always had an abundance of applications for far in excess of vacancies that existed or needs.
When you think of coming here as a young man and as a teacher, what was the social life like here in Palm Springs?
It was pretty much whatever the social inclinations of the individual was, because it was the playground of the stars, and all of the famous movie people were in and out of Palm Springs, and we didn't sigh and gasp at their presence because they were here so eternally. As I've said, the hotels and facilities were open to teachers at the Desert Inn, El Mirador, the Colonial House, the Racket Club. It was, we could go anywhere we wanted to, but in the early days, most of the social life evolved around the school and the students, because so many of the teachers were not too much the senior of the students, and they were actually trying to make the best of all worlds by making available as high type of social program as possible. And so there was a need for their participation in school activities and so-called chaperoning activities, but mostly I guess the teachers needed as much chaperoning as the pupils did.
You have a lovely packet of cards. Would you show those in terms of just, you've kept so closely in touch with so many of your students from over the years.
Well, I can't really show these. I can only indicate some of the headings that I have. Of these are exotic graduate achievers. I'm not going to get into that. These are as a card of tragic deaths of alumni. These are people who have done things that turn out to be sort of unclassified. These were various college graduates from some of the upper name colleges. More of the deceased. And here are a list of former alumni of Palm Springs High School that became college student body presidents. David Self, as a matter of fact, was student body president at Whittier College, and he's an attorney that turned out to be a city attorney for the city of Oakland. And his last venture, he became a city of Oakland attorney, and he lost the case of eminent domain to try to retain the Oakland Raiders football team in the domain of the Oakland. Virginia Valentine became a president of the student body of Whittier College also, and she became a chemist, and Standard Oil Company of California built a laboratory for her, and she earned a name as of all things, as a #1 researcher in the field of drilling muds, which are the lubricants that lubricate the oil well bits that drill thousands of feet down into the earth core. Bob Thompson also. Willie Edwards was twice president of Los Angeles, of the student body of Los Angeles State College. This is a list I wouldn't dare mention. It's called the exotically egregious. They are notoriously bad. They were murderers and pushers, and were captured with an amount of amphetamines and drugs for sale.
Fortunately,
and
a
that sort of
small
thing.
list. Huh?
Yes. Accounting and bookkeeping, and people in administrative offices, and the apparel industries, aviation related and athletics, attorneys, banking and finance, the beverage industry, business affiliations as merchants, builders and developers, building tradesmen, computer skills, cosmetologists, decorators, doctors. Oh, incidentally, one of the greatest pleasures of my life was to see a little kid that used to be my next door neighbor by the name of Wesley Moore, who used to play in the doghouse with a chemistry set and build fireworks and set the place on fire around. He went on to the University of California to become one of the world's first cardiovascular surgeons, and he traveled throughout the world with colored slides and giving lectures on his techniques for cardiovascular surgery, and today he's on the staff at UCLA in his specialty, and probably will attend our next reunion in May of '88. Entertainment, educators, engineers, entrepreneurs, finance, firemen, food services, health services, hotel services, insurance, investments, banking and finance, journalism, law enforcement, librarians, business management, mechanics, electronic and news media, medical technicians, merchants, military, nursing, health services, office and social skills, photography, planning, postal service, public relations, promoters, ranching, real estate, restaurateurs, sales, scientists, self-employed, teachers, that goes on for several cards, technologists, terpsichorists, whatever they are, theological affiliates, transportation, utilities, and some rather unusual occupations. Should we get into that?
Oh, yes, let's.
There's someone who is a girl, I won't mention her name, who is a recruiter. I don't know what she recruits or for what. I think it has to do with hospital equipment and the cosmetological aspects of that. Reuben Fontes is a senior investigator for the California Department of Corporations, whatever that involves. Anita Potash is a coordinator for development developmentally delayed infant therapy. That's Bob Dart was a retired perpetual student and organist that rings the chimes at USC in the chime tower. Kathryn Salbo is a curator of the Indian Museum in Morongo, and she has written a book on Indian cooking, which is rather interesting. And Jim Blackstone, who was the minister's son, was a special assistant representative for Delta Airlines Corporation. Mort Algaze was a dealer when last heard from at a blackjack table in Las Vegas. Glenwood Tompkins was a youngster who was with the Carvel Leprosarium, and Gay Miller is at a kibbutz in Israel, and her brother Jay is a rabbi in Florida. We have two youngsters who are retired from the FBI, Kenny Youngs and Bob Higgins, who are in our community today, and we have two museum curators or directors. Wesley Neff is curator of photography for the new Getty Museum of Photography in Malibu, and Sally Hall McManus, who is the curator of the Palm Springs Historical Society Museum. So that constitutes some of the things that's in the little packet of cards that you mentioned so irreverently.
That special packet of cards that I think reflects this caring that you have for the students that you worked with. How would you sum up your 36 years in education in Palm Springs?
God, I would consider myself to be probably one of the luckiest, most fortunate men who've ever lived, and that I was able to do the thing in life that I wanted to do, that I enjoyed it, and that I had the fantastic rapport that I did with the wonderful people that I worked with as students, as townspeople, as board members, as parents, and as community as a whole.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Ross.